Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan at MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 10th of October 2024. It's a pretty packed video, there's an awful lot to talk about. Goodness me, a lot has happened, and actually this is a geopolitics video that covers 2 days. First of all, Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was in Croatia for the first time. That was yesterday. He will participate in the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit in Dubrovnik. The summit was co-organised by Zelensky and Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković, and it is expected that a number of high-ranking officials from the countries of the region will participate. Indeed, we also hear, well, first of all, Ukraine signed an agreement with Croatia on long-term support and cooperation. Quote, "Together we will develop cooperation between our defence industry. Croatia will continue to provide equipment and share knowledge on humanitarian demining," said the Ukrainian President Zelensky. But he also got to meet with Prime Ministers of Albania, North Macedonia, Greece, and the president of Slovenia as well. So this was a really useful time for him to meet a number of important dignitaries from the area. During the talks, he discussed the situation on the battlefield and the defense needs of the Ukrainian military, as well as the current issues of bilateral relations. I say it again, I've said it a million times. Zelensky is the hardest working politician I think that's ever lived in the history of the world. Like, this man has met more people and just, he's on the go the whole time. That is just phenomenal what he does, and all while his country is being invaded. It's just incredible. Like, yes, you can level some criticism at him, I'm sure, and they'll be, well justified. Nobody's perfect. He's going to have made mistakes. He's going to have made decisions that are problematic, depending on what your metric of success is. But the man works hard, and I don't know that any other person that would have, if you see the way people meet him, that would have engendered such support from other people. I wonder, a bit of psychology here, I wonder whether being small, he feels less threatening. Had he been a really tall man, is such a tall, angular man, or some big, ogreous man, would that have psychologically felt like more of a threat? So if you're a world leader, like, there is something to be said about human psychology and how that affects how meetings take place and how relationships develop. He's a smaller man that is quite compact, and he appears, he's a former comedian, right? Not to discount I think he's got law degree. He is a man that I think you could feel quite comfortable talking to. You're not going to feel threatened. And as a result, you're more likely to want to help him. I don't know if there's an element of that. Because you look at the way he's always really well met by people. And look at that. You got a hug from that guy. Now, had that been a tall, angular man who was taller than that guy, would he have gone in for a hug? I don't know. Yeah, interesting. I never really thought about that. Sorry, I do digress. You know that. Things pop into my mind like popping candy, and I have to release them. Right, release the popping candy. Release the Kraken. President Zelensky is set to visit Rome tomorrow, which will be today, although today we hear he's in London. My goodness, I can't keep up. So Zelensky's set to visit Rome, unless Rome was yesterday and Croatia was the day before, for a meeting with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. He will also have an audience with the Pope on Friday morning, so that's tomorrow morning. So I reckon he's probably going to UK today and then hopping to Italy. So that's 2 countries in a day there. And as you saw, when he went to Croatia, he'd sorted out meeting with a whole bunch of different dignitaries. So it's not, one country doesn't mean you're dealing with one country. So today, Zelensky to meet with UK, Germany, Italy, France leaders within the next day. So that's what I'm talking about. And those are big old leaders. So UK and Germany and France, I don't know if he's going to all of those places individually. You might well do. You might go Croatia, get on a plane, hop to Germany, hop to London, hop to France, and then get to Italy to meet with the Pope as well. Just insane. The guy is indefatigable, to use an unnecessarily long word. So here he is meeting with Sir Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, and again, Hugs, going in for the hugs. It's the little things. It's the little things that we need to concentrate on. So Keir Starmer, smiling, hugging. Would that happen with Putin? What kind of relationship would you have with Putin? What kind of relationship do you have with other world leaders? If Trump was voted in, how would Keir Starmer meet Trump? What would that say about the willingness to do things that would benefit the US as well as the UK? You know, how is a relationship reflective of the kind of deals that you're more likely to do with that country? This kind of psychology that we see here, this kind of respect and enjoyment of each other's company, is that more likely to reflect that Keir Starmer will do more for Zelensky than he otherwise would have done had it been someone different? I think people underestimate what Zelensky has achieved for being Zelensky, not for being just the ruler of the leader of Ukraine. I wonder how much of him as a human has extracted more from other countries in assistance than any other given leader. Like Poroshenko. Would Poroshenko have engendered the response from the international community that Zelensky has had? Would Poroshenko have had people standing up in Congress and applauding, standing up in the Houses of Parliament in the UK applauding when he's given a video speech or a speech in person? I am waxing lyrical about Zelensky because I think we underestimate what he has achieved on account of being who he is. Tim White says, President Zelensky arrived in London this morning. He was welcomed at number 10 by Keir Starmer and will also meet, God, who knew, Mark Rutte, the new NATO chief. You know, it's not just about coming to London to meet British people. It's about, right, my time is really, really valuable. Let's meet as many people as we physically can in as short a time as we possibly can. Zelensky will want to know why the UK has not yet allowed long-range strikes inside Russia when the US seemed to allow it. I think Tim White's got that completely wrong. The UK has allowed it while the US hasn't. So I think he's maybe done a typo there. It's the US that are holding back. But again, you know, worth having a go at Starmer and seeing what more he can do to change that decision. Okay, we're going to go back to the EU. Now, remember, I did that breaking news piece where we had Ursula von der Leyen excoriating Orban, and then Daniel Freund, the German Green MEP, absolutely taking him to pieces. And we saw that in I had a bit of a YouTube short this morning where that was on there. Here we have another MEP. This is Moritz Körner. I told Viktor Orban that he's a useful idiot of Russia and China. He was not amused. Let's just dip into a bit of this, man.
What a speech, Mr. Orban. What a speech. You say you want democracy and you brag about your majorities in the Hungarian parliament. Yet since years, you only rule by emergency decree. Are you so afraid of democracy, Mr. Orban? You say you are for national sovereignty. Yet you invite Chinese policemen to surveil the people in your country. You say you want to stop migration. Yet you let Russian spies into our Schengen system and call it national card. That is what you're doing. Mr. Orban, you are not a patriot. You are just a useful idiot of Russia and China. That's the reality.
Whoa!
You say you want to fight.
This is. I can't believe that he actually sat there and took this, Orban. He's just like one leader after another, one MEP after another, just getting up there and saying, Mr. Orban, you sitting there, just there, 5 meters away, you're a dick. Yeah, and everyone's clapping. Yay! And I'm going to tell you why. Blah, blah, blah. Yay! Just the whole place is just against Viktor Orban. It's just incredible.
For more economic competitiveness. Yet you keep introducing new company laws and taxes to drive European competitors out of your country. You turned Hungary into a banana republic. You robbed your population and enriched your family and friends. Under your rule, Hungary has become one of the poorest and officially the most corrupt country in the EU.
Thank you.
What a fraud. What a burden for your people. Mr. Orban, please step down to make Hungary
Mr.
great
Kerner,
again.
your time is up. Moritz, there's a blue card. Will you take it? Okay, I give the floor for a blue card to Ms. Roth-Nevedalova.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I understand that this is a discussion about the priorities of the Hungarian presidency, despite the fact that many of the speakers are speaking about their feelings and about the different facts, so they should be taken away the floor. But my question for Mr. Kerner is that, can you explain to me, please, how is it connected, the national discussion or national decisions of Hungarian Prime Minister of the Hungarian government with the presidency of the European Union, because this is, I didn't understand very much from your presentation. How is this correlated or connected? And you didn't very much speak about the presidency priorities, which I would like to hear finally somebody in this room to speak about, because this is here is just the hearing of Mr. Prime Minister of Hungary and not the presidency discussion, which should be here. Thank you.
Mr. Kerner, you have
So we have a bit of a defence there of Viktor Orban, and then you've got Kerner coming back at
30
that.
seconds to reply.
Thank you, colleague, for this question, because it's really good. Because it is connected. It should not be differentiated. If you are destroying the rule of law and European values in your country, if there's an Article 7 procedure in place and the rule of law conditionality applied to your country, that should make a difference. You should not make the school bully the school director, and that is what we did in the European Union. That is why this House called for the Council to change that. It could easily be done. We did it already. The Brits, they changed their council
Mr.
presidency. There should not be a council presidency when a member state is violating our fundamental principles.
You have made
That
your
is
point.
what
Thank
it is
you.
about.
Thank you, Mr. Kerner.
Whew. I feel like getting up and shouting and running around, and I can't run, shuffling around and just beating my chest. I presume a Hungarian MEP then said, what's this got to do with the price of fish? And he goes, actually, it's defining the price of fish. Why do we have the rotating presidency being taken on by Hungary, by the Hungarian Prime Minister, when they are violating X and Y and Z in terms of European norms, European kind of constitution charter type, everything that we are working towards, everything that we stand for, that is, Hungary is acting antithetically to that. Absolutely incredible. And then I've read you a bit of what Valérie Hayer says. She's French and she says it in French, but I just want to, just her opening statement here, because obviously she goes on for 5.5 minutes here. I just want to read you the subtitles of what she says. Here. So, Mr. Orban, it must be a change for you to be here. You are not used to being in front of a parliament that demands accountability, and that is exactly what we have planned to do this morning. Ask you to account for your actions, and I'm going to ask you to account for your values, for your money, and your geopolitics. I mean, just the opening gambit there is like, you're not used to accountability because you're in charge of a banana republic type thing. I mean, that's what Kerner just said. And she's like, you're not used to accountability, but you know what? You're going to be held accountable here. And then she launches into 5 minutes of, again, like taking him to the cleaners. Just incredible. Now, interestingly, Hungary was stopping the 35 billion euro loan that's underwritten by the frozen Russian assets. Hungary was stopping that, as well as trying to stop the extension of sanctions from the EU against Russia. That appears to have changed. I need to look into this. But no report says the EU Council has approved up to 35 billion euros in macro financial aid to Ukraine, along with a new loan mechanism supporting 45 billion euros in loans from the EU and G7. The package aims to address Ukraine's urgent financial needs caused by Russia's aggression. I don't know that it says anything about Hungary here, though. That's the 9th of October, yesterday evening. So that does appear to have been solved, possibly. But I will need to look into that. Really good news, potentially. In 2016, Austrian General Staff met with Russian top brass in Moscow in the spirit of neutrality. Later, when Austrians claimed they didn't discuss sanctions during the trip, Russia published the recordings and enjoyed the scandal, a warning to those thinking they're off record with Russia. It's worth noting that, yeah, Austria is somewhat pro-Russian, especially with the new FPO administration or coalition that will be with them. They are the FPO that just did very well in their elections, is much more pro-Russian. They had previously met with Moscow and then claimed that they didn't discuss the sanctions, and then Moscow actually released evidence of them discussing sanctions. So the idea is that, well, here you shouldn't trust Russia. Now, I talked about how the Ramstein meeting is supposed to be taking place in 2 days' time with 20 world leaders: Zelensky, Biden, Scholz, Macron, Starmer, Meloni, Trudeau, Tusk, and all sorts of others at the Ramstein meeting. It was cancelled to be rescheduled at some unknown time, and I said it's probably to do with the elections. And actually, I was put straight by a whole host of people, and this is totally understandable as to why Biden basically cancelled going to Ramstein because there's a hurricane just hitting Florida, a second hurricane, and so it would have been really terrible for the optics had he just been flying off to have this meeting with all these world leaders to talk about how he can support another country while his own country is suffering to a second hurricane in essentially a week. So he rightfully cancelled to have that rescheduled. It would have looked terrible just from a leader's point of view, but also when you've got your own domestic national crisis, but also from a campaign point of view, it would have been campaign suicide. So it's totally understandable that Biden had cancelled on that. I know some people saying, why didn't he just send someone else? I believe that the point here is that you have all the big leaders in one place. So that's why that happened, or that's why the meeting is not going ahead as scheduled. Now, Ukraine is seeking membership in the NATO military alliance as a part of its plan to end Russia's war, and recent reports suggest the West Germany model is seriously being discussed among Kyiv and its allies. There are talks that Kyiv is actually interested in doing a deal, in bringing the war to a close, and that might involve some kind of freezing of the front lines, but being within NATO. And this is what's been talked about before, is that the only way you stop Russia trying to do more is by being in NATO. And so a bit like West Germany and East Germany, where Russia will control that part of Ukraine. And this is exactly what people don't want. Obviously, what's fair is that Ukraine get back all of their sovereign territory. Russia is not going to allow that as long as they can. And so what Ukraine want to do is get to a position in the war where they're in the ascendancy, but they might not be able to physically push all of the Russian troops out of Ukraine. But if they can have some successes, keep hammering away with missiles and drones, and then get to a point where they have the power position in the negotiations, and then they say, and we are going to be part of NATO, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like we're at war because we're just going to draw a line along here, but you will not be able to attack us again, because if you do, it will invoke Article 5. And it seems that is gaining a bit of momentum. Now, apparently Polish farmers have resumed Ukrainian border blockade at one of the crossings, and that will take place until the 31st of December. That is incredibly annoying because it just hurts the Ukrainian exports, and it hurts actually all sorts of transportation between the countries. Dutch banks have released 560 million euros in Russian assets amid sanction loopholes. The value of frozen assets had decreased by over sixfold from initial estimates. So they had overestimated the value of these Russian assets. So just to give you a little bit more insight here, So after the invasion, Western nations froze around 300 billion euros of frozen Russian assets, with 191 billion held in Euroclear under Belgium's oversight. Though intended for Ukraine's defence and reconstruction, no significant actions have been taken regarding these frozen funds, despite ongoing discussions. The development comes after the Dutch Parliament announced in January that 660 million euros in Russian assets would be frozen. However, by the 1st of July, only 97.2 million had actually been blocked. The unfreezing occurred due to exceptions for incomplete payments and the distancing of sanctioned owners. Notably, 430 million belongs to two Russian companies, with 230 million unfrozen after one company was formally distanced from its Russian owner through a special structure. Dutch publication RTL reports that two companies share a single Russian owner. The assets were released after mechanisms were implemented to ensure the sanctioned owner did not influence the companies or indirectly access the funds, so on and so forth. So unfortunately, 560 million appears to have had to have been released from that. Okay, Turkey, which supports the territorial integrity. This is a quote from Erdogan's advisor. Turkey, which supports the territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, also advocates on all platforms that the return of the occupied territories, including Crimea, is a requirement of international law. This is really good. So Turkey's trying to join BRICS at the moment: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, along with another bunch of nations. They are in NATO. They have previously wanted to join the EU. That seems to be on hold at the moment. And Erdogan seems to be consistently talking out both sides of his mouth, but there's still the very clear rhetoric that actually all of Ukraine needs to be returned to Ukraine. That territorial integrity is really clear, and it's clearly stated here by the Turkish. Olaf Scholz is ready, apparently, for talks with Putin if they lead to progress toward peace. According to a German official, on October the 12th at Ramstein, which is now no longer taking place, the message for Ukraine will be strong support, and for Moscow that there's no point speculating about the EU wavering. But the idea is that Scholz is up for maybe talking to Putin. What you don't want is people to talk on behalf of Ukraine. Like Kamala Harris says, that any discussions need to include Ukraine. So those kind of bipartisan the idea that Trump has previously said, he'll sort it out, like he's the one that's doing all the decision making, rather than actually giving agency to the very country that's been invaded. Right, and they need to be a part of any discussions, of course. Now, Turkey, following Russia, has blocked Discord Messenger, saying, according to their justice minister. So I reported in my video earlier, which I still haven't released. YouTube's been very difficult today. There it is, published. I reported that the Russian forces are complaining about Discord being blocked, and actually it's something that the Russian forces use to communicate, and their drone crews use for access to their videos, and etc., etc. Well, anyway, it looks like Turkey has followed Russia in this way. He said the decision was made after an investigation revealed that the use of the platform it was used for extortion, propaganda, violence, and sexual harassment. Sounds a bit like sort of some of those arguments against Telegram. Right. Jakub Janowski says, I remember Discord being used by some Russian unit HQ, so this might inconvenience them a bit. Well, indeed. So the blocking of, as mentioned earlier, the blocking of Discord has annoyed the heck out of an awful lot of Russians. Okay, Russian coal is collapsing due to decreasing Russian railroad monopoly transportation capability. Let's read this thread to discuss that. The worst crisis in 30 years, Russia's coal mining industry begins to collapse, says Moscow Times, the exiled Russian outlet. The worst crisis in 30 years. Okay, there are several things I want to point out about this situation, says Prune60, often talks about logistics like this. First of all, this isn't a surprise, but rather a series of events that are leading to this outcome. But as it falls, I want to give you some things to think about, because it's possible it will lead to an unexpected outcomes everywhere in Russia. So to begin with, the Russian railways wasn't able to provide all the shipping that the coal companies required. The system was overloaded. No transport led to a shutdown in production. The railways and coal are heavily tied together. To make a long story short, a series of bad decisions by Russian railways years ago, followed by the repercussions of the 2022 invasion, has put Russian railway in a bad position. They were likely going to end up here anyway, but the events of 2022 likely accelerated things. Years ago, Russian railways, a monopoly, eliminated their entire maintenance department. In the time since then, locomotives have not been properly maintained. In addition, about half of their locomotives are over 20 years old, and parts are no longer made. The older locomotives take longer to repair, something that took a very painfully long study for the leadership to comprehend, like the old stuff takes more upkeep. Plus, finding the parts is also challenging. On top of that, the maintenance staff became overloaded. People like to point out that Russia is getting new locomotives without recognizing the scale of the problem. It's like saying that you're running, but you're running from an avalanche. Can you run fast enough to keep from being buried? Russia often does this. They operate large companies with small business mentalities. You can expect for someone to manufacture or sell you all the locomotives you need immediately for a country the size of Russia. They should have known that. This is just one of the many problems weighing down an overextended system, which helps explain why loading is shrinking. In this thread, I discuss some things to keep an eye on. It's something to look at as we move forward. So there's a whole other thread about loading going down, so just not carrying as much stuff. As you can see from this pie chart, coal is a significant part of Russian railways transportation mix. In fact, it's that big blue chunk there, and coal is heavily reliant on rail, like almost anything in Russia, to be able to get their goods to the market. As we've already seen, one example of the railways restricting coal production, so now I'm going to show you an example of why more people need to be critical of any Russian projections. Quote, Russian government is basing its energy strategy on a constant increase in coal production from the current 438 million tonnes per year to 482 million tonnes in 2030 and 556 million in 2050. End quote. Why? I just showed you how the railway was limiting shipments, and it's getting worse. So in other words, when Russia is projecting increases in X, Y, and Z, and its budget therefore looking healthier and getting more money in from this increased production, you need to be a little bit critical of those Russian projections from government, because actually it's not looking like that's at all possible. But that's not the only problem. I wrote this long thread about several stages the Russian government has gone through since the 2022 invasion, worth reading for lots of details and sources, because things have changed. I'm not looking into that, but it's Russian bonds and other bad economic news. So basically, economy is in trouble. In a nutshell, phase one, Russia is using up all the stuff that they had stockpiled for the war and still had from the USSR days. Expenses were relatively low. 2022. Phase 2, Russia has to start spending money because they ran out of their stockpiles. Things get expensive. Think of things like artillery shells and Iranian drones, also refurbishing some of their older Soviet equipment. That's 2023. Phase 3, secondary sanctions cause chaos. 2024. Why do I bring this up? Well, in phase 2, when expenses really started skyrocketing, the Ministry of Finance ran around looking for funds to pay for it, like a one-time tax. If you remember, they taxed the crap out of Gazprom, making it lose record amounts of money. Danone, they nicked Danone, they kind of nationalized a bunch of companies still trading in Russia. If you read the agricultural thread, you'll remember this is the time when the Russian government took all the profits from what should have been a profitable year. Now there's no savings and agriculture is not doing well. Remember, there were loads of floods. Coal was not immune to this, and when you read this next part, it may begin to make sense why taro has become popular in Russian businesses. Trend for taro readers being recruited. Read the excerpt from a May 2024 article about the way the Ministry of Finance kept treating duties. No warning at all. They were able to essentially do what they wanted, but that's not all. And we're not going to go into that detail, but just take it for granted. See, margins everywhere were already low on coal, but not only were they getting hit with duties from Russia, they were also getting hit with duties from China. See, China has free trade agreements with several countries, but not Russia. So coal from Australia doesn't have to pay duties. Coal from Russia does, which means their profitability drops even further. But wait, there's more. The cost of transportation is a huge expense for coal, an expense that they can't really negotiate anywhere but at the port. They're stuck with Russian railways costs and limitations. things were going bad in a hurry. Even with the worsening state of the coal industry, it took a court order to get the Ministry of Finance to stop going after it for funds to feed Russia's war addiction. And remember how they unveiled their new tax plan for 2025? Now bigger and more expensive taxes. But even with their new plan, the coal prices were so low that the Ministry of Finance still won't be able to extract funds from them, something they may or may not have accounted for in the new projected budget. Russian Railways is also projecting more price increases. I often remind people not to equate the state of the Russian government's budget with the state of the Russian economy. As you've seen, the Russian government has a lot more power to take what it wants than other countries. For that reason, I also remind you to think about the Russian economy like an ecosystem. But the Russian government acts as a predator that is out of control with little to no checks on its consumption. In its ecosystem, coal is like a keystone species. If coal in Russia collapses, then major portions of the country may begin accelerated depopulation. This Komarovo Oblast, also known as Kuzbas because of the Kuznetsk Basin, which is a huge coal mining region. Coal is huge here. If these people leave, they are unlikely to return, and it will be even more difficult to rebuild the industry. If the area is unpopulated, Putin is worried he may lose it. And then you have an idea of how important it is. One of the lowest rate preferential mortgages you can get is for the Far East. Now, if coal begins to collapse, suddenly there's going to be a lot more available railway capacity, which is one of the topics I discuss in the railway thread. Right now, Russian railways is still the limiting factor. Railways loading numbers. That means demand for shipping is greater than supply, and the supply continues to shrink because of their locomotive problems. But I warned you that it was possible that the economy begins to tank faster than Russian railways loading does. That means that suddenly, even with Russian railways shrinking shipping capability, the demand plummets even lower. This means things get much worse, and coal is a massive source of loading. Keep in mind also that Russian railways won't be able to replace all this weight with other loading, because you can move a lot more tons of coal in one gondola car than you can with a likely substitution, one container car. The collapse of the coal industry in Russia will massively unbalance Russia, and a lot of things will begin to shift with it as the country tries to rebalance things. However, the magnitude of the possible collapse remains to be seen, but it's important to look at just how far-reaching these changes will be. No matter what happens, things are bad now, and it will get worse. So there you go. That is that is something to consider. It's a really important thread there from Prune 60, looking at the impact of a worsening coal industry on a railway industry and how they are kind of co-extensive. They're linked together. And things are looking bad for Russia. You know, there will be so many industries that themselves depend on coal and railways, and yeah. Right, talking of business in Russia, Unilever has finally exited the Russian market after 2.5 years of all-out war in Ukraine. The company announced the completion of its very complex Russian subsidiary sale, so they've obviously divested all of their entities within Russia, and Unilever are a massive company. They will have all sorts of fingers and all sorts of pies. And finally, in this section, Financial Times investigative report has found that Russia used a British citizen, John Ormerod, to purchase 25 oil tankers to then circumvent sanctions, using them to earn 7.4 trillion billion. No, that's billion. So I was going to say that's an awful lot. 7.4 billion for Russians, Putin's war machine. That is good stuff from the Financial Times. This is why I often say we need to support mainstream media to continue to do things like investigative reporting, because otherwise, if they don't exist, investigative reporting doesn't exist, and it doesn't find out international, in this case, ne'er-do-wells who are trying to get around, in this case, Russian sanctions. Okay, now moving on to, I know this is a long video, sorry not sorry. Right, we're going to get on to American politics and how that pertains to Ukraine and Russia. So as I'm sure all of you know, as I discussed in my breaking news update the other night, in his new book Rage, Washington Post journalist Bob Woodward writes that in 2020, Donald Trump secretly sent COVID-19 tests, actual test machines, to Putin when they were in short supply in the US Putin, who was terrified of the virus, accepted the test but asked Trump to keep it a secret. Book also claims that after his presidency, Trump called Putin up to 7 times, including one call in early 2024. Remember, this is against the Logan Act, which is where you can't have kind of unilateral decisions from American citizens to talk to other nations on behalf, if you like, of the US, or bypass the US, or circumvent or undermine the US objectives. So here you have, I would say, very clear contravention of the Logan Act by Trump by phoning Putin 7 times, including in early 2024, early this year. Woodward describes Trump as, quote, the most reckless president and considers him unfit for re-election. A Trump spokesman denied these allegations. Woodward further states that that Biden publicly supported Israel but clashed with Netanyahu over military actions in Rafah. We won't go into that. But what we will do is dip into a little bit of information on this.
Breaking, explosive new reporting about the secret relationship Trump has been carrying on with Vladimir Putin. One that we now know tonight includes as many as 7 private phone calls since Trump left office. Another revelation tonight is a bit bizarre, and that is that Trump sent Putin individual COVID tests at the height of COVID. Now, according to legendary journalist Bob Woodward's new book, those tests were sent to Putin during the height of the pandemic in 2020, right? When gosh, nobody could get a hold of tests. Now, during a call at the time, Putin tells Trump, quote, please don't tell anybody you sent these to me. And Trump replies, and Woodward's the one putting quotes around this, I don't care, fine. Putin says, no, I don't want you to tell anybody because people will get mad at you, not me. They don't care about me. Now, Trump sending Putin personal COVID tests is at the least fascinating. I mean, how did they get to Putin? Who knew about them? Did Trump send them to other world leaders, or was this just special for Putin? And then did Putin really use COVID tests sent from America, putting his DNA on them? I mean, what was this about? Well, today, Vice President Kamala Harris had this to say about it.
In the height of the pandemic, and remember, and your listeners will remember, people were dying by the hundreds.
Yeah.
Everybody was scrambling to get these kits, the tests, the COVID test kits.
Couldn't get them.
Right. Couldn't get them anywhere.
Right.
And this guy who is president of the United States is sending them to Russia, to a murderous dictator for his personal use. You're getting played. And some would say, look, I grew up in the neighborhood. Some would say you're getting punked.
Yeah.
If you stand in favor of somebody who's an adversary over your friends on principles that we all agree on.
Now, the Trump campaign...
I really feel like she nailed that, Kamala Harris, and I think this is just... It's another invalidating element of... Well, another invalidating element of Trump's candidacy, really, nomination for president. So here we have 7 phone calls going out. Tristan Snell talking about this being an issue with regard to the Logan Act, as mentioned. Michael McFaul, the previous ambassador to Russia from the US, says the news of Trump phone calls with Putin confirms his most consistent foreign policy position of the last decade. Trump admires Putin. Trump seeks to appease Putin. Trump seeks flattery from Putin. None of that serves the security or prosperity of Americans. I don't disagree with that. Biden tells Woodward that ultimately Barack Obama is the one to blame for Russia invading Ukraine. So this is interesting. Something else that comes out from the book is that Biden was very critical of Obama's approach to Ukraine since 2014. Ahead of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is a quote from the book, Biden complained that Obama didn't do enough to stop Putin in 2014 when the Russian leader invaded Crimea. Quote, they effed up in 2014, Biden said to a friend, according to Woodward. Actually, no, this is from CNN, not from the book. But it's quoting from the book. That's why we are here. We effed up. Barack never took Putin seriously. And actually, this is a criticism that is, I think, justifiably leveled at Barack Obama. It wasn't it Mitt Romney that said Russia are the biggest adversary, and kind of Obama laughed it off. But actually, that's kind of come back to haunt the Democrats, or at least Obama, since then. Okay, because of the media blitz that Kamala Harris has had recently on these TV shows and on podcasts and whatnot, we have this, appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert that was excellent. I advise you go and watch this, and it's excellent on account of the very strong rhetoric that she has with regard to Ukraine and Putin and other dictators around the world that she eventually calls even murderers. She is so strong in her rhetoric against these people that it is in stark contrast to the lack of that kind of rhetoric we see from the other side. And I talk about this in a while. Now, I've released this video. I've had to come back and interject with this piece that you're listening to now because I cannot show any of the Late Show. I get a copyright infringement. So what I'm going to do is just play you the intermissions where I'm ranting about different aspects of what she says positively. But you're not going to hear what she says. I really do advise you go and search this out on the internet, on YouTube. Go and listen to Stephen Colbert's interview with Kamala Harris because it is very good and it does pertain in large parts to the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
Right. I always say the little things, concentrate on the little things and what people say and those words that they say. Right. When have you heard... Xi Jinping, Putin and Orban, when have you heard those people be called murderers by Trump or Vance? This is really bloody clear rhetoric here coming from Kamala Harris, and I like it because it is not that I want war and conflict, and Trump will go, oh, you got to be mates with them, but, you know, Putin has invaded another country and is responsible for 150,000 war crimes and the needless death of hundreds of thousands of people, including his own population. This is exactly right. This is exactly what I want to hear. This is not performative. It is a performance she's putting on. But you can feel that she genuinely believes this, right? And that's what I like about what she says. She's absolutely right. And she's indignant here. She is angry here. And I think has every right to be. And I'm going to go back to this. Like, when have you heard the Republican ticket, top of the ticket, say stuff like this? We are here, all of us, you guys watching this, because we support Ukraine that much. And what we want is a strong leader, allied leader in particularly the United States to be saying, I really bloody want to support Ukraine and that Putin is a murderous expletive, right? This is what we've got from Kamala Harris. You can see it's there. Listen to her words. You have not had anything remotely like that from Trump. That is why I would never vote for Trump. If you are talking about only being concerned with Ukraine and foreign policy, this is all you need to know as far as I'm concerned. I cannot fault what she said there. Absolutely on the point. I'm sorry. You know what I feel about Trump now, and if you don't, where have you been for the last 2 years? But that said it all for me.
As president, would you support...
Now, there is an issue with regard to Kamala Harris being questioned on whether Ukraine should join NATO. And this was brought up in her interview on 60 Minutes, I believe.
The effort to expand NATO to include Ukraine.
Those are all issues that we will deal with if and when it arrives at that point. Right now, we are supporting Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russia's unprovoked aggression.
She did not answer the question about Ukraine's NATO membership. Does the vice president...
Which is important because we've just been talking about how that's actually an integral part of their peace plan. But I don't know. A defence could be that you just want to stay vague. I don't want to commit one way or the other. We are talking about that right now. Just park that. And I think that's what she's saying. And actually, I would broadly agree with that, which is, you know, don't put everything out there in the public sphere. These are parts of ongoing discussions. Or should they be much stronger and say, yeah, we're pushing for Ukraine to join NATO?
President support Ukraine's push to join NATO eventually?
Well, look, Kate, and thanks for having me this morning. I think that what the vice president was saying last night is true, which is right now, in this very moment, the most important thing that the United States and the international community can be doing is supporting Ukraine against this invasion from Putin and his war of aggression that has been brutal and slaughtered so many people in Ukraine. And she is committed to doing that. I think that what she was saying last night is that there will be a time and place for discussions like that. Right now, the most important thing is that the international community rally around Ukraine. CNN just this morning has new reporting on Bob Woodward's book that is coming out that reveals that President Trump, since he left office as a private citizen, has, according to Trump's own aides, had at least 7 one-on-one calls with Vladimir Putin. I don't know what those are about. I don't know if the Trump campaign or President Trump have explained what those are about, but what the vice president said last night rings even truer. Donald Trump's plan with Ukraine and Russia would be for Ukraine to surrender and to let Vladimir Putin take territory that he is trying to steal. That is
They
dangerous.
very clearly have a different position on how they approach Russia, Ian. There's no question about that. But the former Secretary General of NATO, he has even said that it's a question of when, not if Ukraine will join the NATO alliance. Does Kamala Harris agree with that?
Well, I'm going to reiterate what the vice president said, which is that there'll be a time for that conversation. Right now, the conversation should be focused on how do we make sure Ukraine has the resources it needs to repel Putin and Russia. It is something that she has led the international community on, meeting with President Zelensky numerous times and rallying our allies. Donald Trump is saying cede territory to Russia. That should scare every American who is thinking about him returning to the Oval Office. But I just want to make this point. When Donald Trump says that we should give territory from Ukraine to Putin, think about what that means. That means that the potential president of the United States is signaling to the world that if you're a dictator like Vladimir Putin and you want to take another country next door, go right ahead. That is not the kind of strength that America needs on the world stage. And it's why the vice president has been so strong in standing up for Ukraine and for the United States in this moment.
When's the right time, if there's a time and place for it, when is the right time for the vice president to...
And he's absolutely right, by the way. This guy is obviously answering on behalf of Kamala Harris. He's in Wilmington, Delaware, so I think he's at a campaign office there, Harris walks by. So he's answering on behalf of Harris. He's absolutely right what he says, although he has not... Well, he has answered it as much as he can, which is, she will talk about that. We just don't want to commit to that now. The question is, well, is that good enough to not commit to Ukraine joining NATO?
To make her position known on if Ukraine if she would support Ukraine's joining NATO.
Well, Kate, I think that for people who want to know the position of these two candidates, again, on this campaign for 1 month more before the election on Ukraine and Russia, I think it's a pretty clear distinction of who has Ukraine's back, who is making sure that Putin and his dictatorial reign is repelled when he tries to invade neighboring countries, and that we just cannot afford the risk that Trump would put the United States in by letting dictators like Putin do that.
And I totally agree. So obviously not going to answer the NATO question, but absolutely agree there. And I think, I think Harris has shown herself in the last couple of days. She's had a media blitz, gone around Howard Stern. We're going to hear another bit from the Howard Stern interview here. And 60 Minutes and different sort of podcasts and whatnot, and Stephen Colbert. She has been, I think, very, very clear on Ukraine on a number of occasions. Here's another one, in a way that we don't see from the other side.
A guy who says he doesn't support Ukraine wouldn't get on that stage with you and say, I support Ukraine. And why do my fellow Americans want this kind of chaos overseas? Why?
To your point, doesn't support our friend Ukraine, doesn't support, therefore, something America should always, and has always, by the way, been a champion of, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which means the importance of standing against anyone who tries to take another nation by force.
Right.
That's what we stand for as Americans, that you don't do that. And if you do that to our friends, we're going to stand with our friends. you're getting played. And some would say, look, I grew up in the neighborhood.
And we heard this earlier.
Some would say you're getting punked.
Yeah.
If you stand in favor of somebody who's an adversary over your friends on principles that we all agree on. And you look at it, it's not only that. He says he's going to be a dictator on day one.
A guy.
So, yeah, I like her clarity there. Now, we've got an article, well, actually, we've got a book out by Christopher Steele. Now, Christopher Steele was this guy, UK intelligence, who was involved in the Steele dossier that had Trump doing all sorts of funky things in Russia, for example. So he is a bit of a boogeyman for the Republicans, but his book reveals some interesting nuggets. So talking about the dossier Steele, Trump angrily rejected the dossier Steele and sued Steele, the Steele dossier, sorry. Trump angrily rejected it and sued Steele. The case was thrown out this year. This is an interesting one. And Trump was ordered to pay costs. An order Steele says has not been met. Again, we have this reality that Trump just doesn't pay his bills. He's not a Lannister, that's for sure. Steele now writes that the day after the 2016 election, he felt, quote, disturbed and, quote, afraid for democracy, for the United States, for the world at large, as he felt his warnings about Trump and Russia had fallen on deaf ears. So he was, warning about the relationship between Trump and Russia. Quote, we were no longer even on good terms with the FBI. We had tried to warn them and the public about Trump and Russia, and we had failed. How long would it be before Trump himself found out that about our reporting and about us? How would he respond? Chaos is about to break out, I thought. He and his partner, he says, felt they had, quote, a fresh duty. We needed to tell the British government about our work because Trump's election could pose a direct threat to UK national interests. If Trump was compromised, the British government needed to know. Steele says he visited Charles Farr, chair of the British Joint Intelligence Committee, who circulated a summary of Steele's finding, quote, among the key people in government, including senior British officials and ministers. But, Steele writes, repeating testimony to MPs, a Conservative government then led by Theresa May chose to, quote, sit on the information and avoid alienating the incoming American president. In other words, if they kind of concentrated on stuff that Steele had found in his research, then that would have caused a rift between the UK and the incoming American president. Steele says he had briefed May before, but, quote, she was clearly worried about alienating Britain's most powerful ally. It was a cowardly behaviour, in my opinion, and wrong. This is being close to the United States, and then there is being close to the United States to the extent that one's own national security is jeopardized. Steele discusses the reported occasion in May 2017 when Trump shared, quote, top secret intelligence allegedly about an Israeli asset working inside the terrorist group ISIS with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. Sources, Steele say, believe Russia told Iran, which tipped off ISIS, leading to the death of the asset. Steele, I mean, these assets take often years to nurture, and they're incredibly valuable. Steele then cites his impeccable source, so he had an impeccable source, saying Trump took documents concerning British naval secrets. So this is the title of this article is Trump took British naval secrets to Mar-a-Lago, says Christopher Steele. So Steele, where was I? Saying Trump took documents concerning British naval secrets to Mar-a-Lago. He also says the British government knew of links between Trump and Moscow before his intervention, as the Australian government reported activities involving a Trump advisor, George Papadopoulos, in 2016. A long-delayed British report on Russian influence was published in 2020, by which time May had been succeeded as Prime Minister by Boris Johnson. The Labour Party, then in opposition, said the report authors, a cross-party group of MPs and peers, had shown, quote, the scale of the shortcomings of the government's response to maintaining our national security in face of what is clearly a growing and significant threat from Russia. Steele calls May's decision to stay close to Trump, quote, at best, denial, and at worst, irresponsible. The British government had decided to pretend that Trump was a normal president-elect and that he had not been helped in his victorious election campaign by Russia, and that he and his team could be trusted with the most sensitive life and death information that governments hold, and as we later saw, they could not. Wow. So, absolutely incredible, that, and just the accusation that somebody died as a result of Trump sharing something with Lavrov. that shouldn't have been shared. Absolutely incredible. Now, there's a Timothy Ash who's a great writer. Timothy Ash piece for Chatham House think tank. So he has written on JD Vance's neutrality pitch for Ukraine being a misguided shortcut to peace that only paves the way for Russia's next invasion. In other words, JD Vance is not the right choice for Ukraine and is the right choice for Russia. Now, if you want to see the effect that all of this lack of clarity from people like Trump has on the voter, listen to this. It's absolutely incredible, this. And it shows you that if you don't have someone like Trump like demonizing or very clearly talking about exactly who Putin really is and exactly who the bad guys are in this conflict, then this is what you get.
To vote for Kamala Harris or Putin? Who do you choose?
Putin.
Really? Why?
Absolutely. He's for his people. He is for his people.
You don't think Kamala is?
Oh, hell no.
Interesting. So you think the country would be better off under a rule like a Kim Jong-un or somebody, or Vladimir Putin?
Hey, I love Russia.
You do? Why?
Yeah, it's beautiful. The people are wonderful.
What are your main sources of news?
Okay. I have numerous sources of news, but I don't watch mainstream.
What do you watch? Russia Today?
Russia Today? No, never heard of that.
What do you watch?
Oh, I watch Dan Bongino.
Dan Bongino, that's where you get it from. So when Mike Pence in 2021 certified the results, do you think Mike Pence was in the wrong?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. The vice president has that authority.
He doesn't?
Yes, he does.
Kamala Harris will be certifying this election. Would you be okay with her making a unilateral decision?
Oh, no, because you know it's going to be for her.
Okay, so why wouldn't Mike Pence's decision have been for his own ticket?
Because he was bought off.
By who?
The deep state.
And there you go. I mean, it's one conspiracy after another. But the idea is that Putin, it's acceptable to say, I'd rather Putin was in charge of this country. The Russian people are lovely people. It's a beautiful place. Like, have you ever been there? Have you ever spoken to any? Like, where are you getting this information from? I'm not denigrating the whole of Russia, all of Russian people, of course, myself. But it's kind of problematic to have that sort of opinion, whereby you would put Russia and Putin over 50% of your own country. Just, it blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. And then talking of political compromise, Dr. Jill Stein, so that's her there in the back of this. She is the third party candidate for the Green Party, but the American Green Party is compromised in a way that European Green Parties aren't. It seems like the Germany Green Party is very pro-Ukraine, very mainstream, actually, as a political party, whereas in the US, it's only going to get like minimal support, and it's essentially, as I say, compromised. As Dr. Jill Stein looks on, the endorser Hassan Abdel Salem admits their goal is for Donald Trump to win the election.
Make no mistake that this rumble of abandon guarantees a failure for the vice president, the loss of Michigan, and the loss of the White House. That we can depose the leaders who sit atop a superpower, a success that will happen immediately when we know the results on the 5th of November. Make no mistake.
And Jill Stein appears to be endorsing all that, so, you know, makes you understand who she's working for, and that will... but remember, she was one who was asked very clearly by Mehdi Hassan as to why she wasn't calling Putin a war criminal, and yet she was calling other people war criminals like Netanyahu and Biden. And she was like, well, he's never been done for being a war criminal. It's like, he's gotten arrested warrant by the International Criminal Court, and she didn't even know that. So Jill Stein, you know which side her bread is buttered. Anyway, that's enough from me. It's enough of me waffling on. I honestly think that if we're just thinking about Ukraine and Russia, there is only one choice in the US election that makes any sense whatsoever. And I think in order to continue to argue that Trump is the right choice for Ukraine, you have to do mental gymnastics, of which I am just not capable. I just, you know, you have to mentally gerrymander your own brain to compartmentalize and bury things in such a way that you're just distorting reality. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.